If you've ever heard the name Dave Filoni, it was probably in the context of him being declared to be Star Wars Messiah, the one prophesized to bring balance to the franchise. At least that's the narrative that's been pushed by some of the more, let's call them optimistic Star Wars fans for the last few years now. And as his position within Lucasfilm has grown to higher and higher prominence, so too has his influence over the projects being produced. But is he really the right person to be in that role? That's the question I had going into this analysis, and to find the answer, we're going to take a deep dive into every episode of the Clone Wars TV show that our Bestetson friend had direct creative influence in, and by the end of the series, we will hopefully be able to determine once and for all whether he has come to bring Star Wars revival or Ragnarok. Now, the main reason I chose to focus on Filoni's work in the Clone Wars specifically is because this show gives us 18 certified Dave Filoni episodes to use in our analysis, totaling over 7.5 hours of runtime. And not only is this way more Filoni content than exists in any other project he's worked on, it's also more individual Filoni stories. In contrast to a show like Ahsoka, which just has the one story stretched out over its entire season, the Clone Wars is an anthology series, meaning almost every single episode, or 2 to 3 episode arc, is its own unique self-contained narrative. This gives us a much larger sample size to analyze, and the more comprehensive our dataset is, the more accurate our findings will be. And accuracy is the goal here. We want to try and get the clearest picture of what Dave himself personally thinks about the Star Wars galaxy and what his philosophy is for writing its characters. And since the series spans across 12 years of his career, we'll also be able to see how that philosophy has evolved over time, if it's evolved at all. Now, in an effort to not make this video a million hours long, we're going to take these 18 Filoni episodes and break them up across a 6-part series. Part 1, which you're watching now, will cover his contributions to seasons 1 and 2. Part 2 will cover season 3, and so on. As you can see, we have a lot of ground to cover here, so without further delay, let us begin our foray into the fedora-infested fever dream that is the mind of Dave Filoni, as I present to you now for your viewing pleasure, Season 1, Episode 2 of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Rising Malevolence.
I think people they don't understand quite how it works, because when you start out and you get this job and you meet George Lucas and you're going to work with him on making Star Wars and he's laying out the groundwork and then he says, okay, go and do it, you're almost like, I've dreamed of this moment my whole life and now I'm actually going to tell this story. Wait, how does it start?
The show's opening narration begins, giving us a lovely little clone Wojak meme that I will now be using for everything, thank you very much for that. This intro tells us that the Republic Starfleet is under siege and has recently sustained major losses to a mysterious new separatist superweapon. This weapon has single-handedly disabled and destroyed dozens of Republic warships, and thus far has left no survivors. Now, I know this is going to seem really nitpicky of me, especially this early in the analysis, but under siege is technically not the correct term for what's going on here. The Republic forces are under attack, definitely, but under siege is a completely different and very specific military tactic, where you surround a city to cut off their supply lines and basically starve them into surrender. Slipping in with a superweapon, destroying enemy ships, and then disappearing without a trace is not a siege. That's more of a strike and fade tactic. Now, I know people use under siege colloquially sometimes, and again, I do recognize the level of pedantry I'm engaging in here, but this is a series about war, so getting your war terminology down is kind of important. Anyway, this so-called superweapon turns out to be a massive heavy cruiser called the Malevolence, operating under the command of Count Dooku and General Grievous. Yes, both of them on the same ship. More on that later. Built into the hull of this heavy cruiser are 2 enormous ion cannon arrays, one on the port side and one on the starboard side. Now, ion cannons are nothing new in Star Wars. You can see them being used during the Battle of Hoth to allow rebel transports to escape past the ISDs. Implementing them on this scale, as far as I'm aware, is new, and it's quite the technological achievement. In the episode itself, you don't really get a good sense of scale for how big this ship actually is. But for reference, according to Bastion of Truth Wikipedia, the Malevolence is actually more than 4 times the size of a Republic Venator. That means if you had a Lego version of this ship that was to scale with the Lego UCS Venator, it would be over 14 feet long. Even the ionizing pulses it fires are massive, able to cripple 3 Republic ships with a single blast. That makes this ship a massive threat to the Republic fleet, and so the Council has sent out Jedi Master Plo Koon to track it down. We enter the story as Plo arrives in the Abrogado system aboard his flagship the Triumphant, along with 2 other Venators from the 4th Fleet of the GAR. The Republic troops identify the Malevolence and are preparing their attack, but Plo decides to call in reinforcements prior to engaging. This is not a great plan. If you can see the Malevolence on your scanner, then that means they can definitely see you on theirs as well, so one of two things is going to happen very quickly. Either the Malevolence is going to immediately turn tail and try to make a clean getaway into hyperspace, in which case reinforcements would be no use, or more likely, they're going to turn around and use their super weapon to destroy you, just like they did to the other guys, which leaves you with exactly 0 time to wait around for reinforcements. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to alert your allies that you found the enemy weapon, I just don't see the utility in halting your attack to do so. Actually, after seeing the size of this weapon and taking a few quick sensor readings, it would probably be a better idea to make like brave Sir Robin and bravely run away. A strategic retreat with valuable intel about the super weapon would still be a huge victory for the Republic, and it would allow Plo to beef up his fleet in order to be better prepared for the next encounter. But rather than fighting or fleeing, Plo decides to freeze, and as a result, Grievous is able to jam their transmissions, cutting off their call for reinforcements, and after a painfully cringy ripoff of Star Wars 77,
"You may fire when ready."
"Yes, my lord."
the Malevolence fires an ion burst from its giant ion pulse cannons, completely disabling the Republic fleet, leaving them shieldless and unable to defend themselves against the ensuing barrage of turbo laser blasts. Plo and 3 clone troopers do manage to make it into an escape pod and launch just before their ship explodes, but unfortunately, the pod's electrical systems were fried during the attack. One of the clones mentions that due to the damage sustained, there is no life support recharge. I have no idea what that means or how you recharge a life support system. As far as I understand the kinetic theory of gases, which isn't very far, but still, as I understand it, I don't believe there's any way to recharge oxygen molecules. There's also obviously no oxygen outside the pod to harvest, so unless the Republic has somehow found a way to synthesize oxygen, this recharge line really doesn't make any sense other than to artificially raise the stakes and add a ticking clock to the situation. Meanwhile, over in the Bith system, Anakin is being pestered by Ahsoka to go and help Plo, but Anakin tells her that they have to ask permission from the Council first. Anakin warns Ahsoka that this is a very important meeting, and explicitly tells her not to speak unless spoken to. This is, of course, Jedi protocol. Ahsoka is a Padawan, and she's being given a huge privilege here, to be able to sit in on a holocall with the big three of the Jedi Council, Mace, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, as well as Chancellor Palpatine himself. But when asked to be respectful, Ahsoka responds,
"Don't I always?"
Which really just makes you want to... Anakin and Ahsoka enter the interior command room, and Anakin relays to the Council Plo's message and the sudden loss of communication, and he infers that they have likely been destroyed. This shocks and upsets Ahsoka for some reason. Wait, weren't they just having a conversation about this 5 seconds ago? Did she forget the part where Plo says, "We've found the mystery weapon, we need reinforcements," and then the call suddenly dropped? What did she think happened there? Did she think T-Mobile just went out again or something? Also, why does she care so much about a random Jedi Master like Plo Koon? I thought attachment's forbidden and all that. Oh well, I'm sure we'll get some clunky exposition dump later in the episode that lays it all out for us, and this little reaction is meant to foreshadow that. Anakin tells the Council that they are preparing a rescue mission to go and look for survivors, but Mace tells him that his fleet is needed where it is to help protect the Republic supply lines. Ahsoka then suddenly blurts out the most useless statement in the history of statements.
Wait! Just because there haven't been any survivors before doesn't mean there won't be any this time.
Wow, I bet nobody's ever thought of that before. After the call shuts off, Anakin scolds Ahsoka for speaking out of turn. Yes, good Anakin, good. Showing he's matured up a bit since becoming a knight, trying to pass on some wisdom to annoying Orange over here. This dynamic is neat, and I'm super interested to see how they explore it moving forward. It would be a shame if they somehow undercut this whole interaction in literally the next scene. So anyway, Anakin speaks with Admiral Yularen and suggests that they split up their forces to maximize efficiency. He says that he and Ahsoka are going to go scout ahead. That is, of course, a lie. What they're actually going to do is defy the wishes of the Council and go on the rescue mission anyway, meaning Ahsoka gets rewarded for breaking protocol and throwing a tantrum, which completely takes all the air out of Anakin's chastisement and reinforces her bad behavior. How disappointing. Let me break it down for you this way. I'm a dad, right? And my 4-year-old son, Zorro Jr., can be a particularly precocious little fella. From time to time, he'll get a notion in his head that if he just throws a big enough fit, then I'll give in and give him whatever he's whining about. Now, that's a normal thing for a 4-year-old to try and do, but since my goal as his dad is for him to eventually become a productive member of society, the last thing I want to do in those moments of outburst is give him what he wants, especially if the thing he wants could potentially harm him, and especially if Mrs. Zorro already told him no. Now, Anakin here has a similar goal in training Ahsoka. His mentorship is meant to build her into a competent and reliable Jedi Knight, one who respects and will follow the will of the Council. Him giving in to her tantrum here is counterproductive to that end. Worse than that, after he lied to the Council and lied to Yularen, he then took her alone in a light freighter to the scene of an absolute massacre, where whatever super weapon the Separatists have has just destroyed 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers. This decision is beyond just stupid. It's reckless, irresponsible child endangerment on top of setting a horrible example for his mentee. I mean, what would even be the lesson here? Better to ask for forgiveness than permission? Except they did ask for permission, and permission was denied. And yeah, sure, I guess they can still ask for forgiveness, unless they're dead. Meanwhile, the clones on the pod are beginning to feel despondent about their situation. One of them points out that it wouldn't be strategically smart for the Republic to come looking for them, and that if he were in command, he would abandon them in favor of hunting down the weapon. On hearing this assessment, Plo says this:
I value your life more than finding that weapon.
Oh, wow. Bleeding hearts of the world unite. Now, I get it. You want to keep morale up as a leader, but Plo, do you really value the life of one clone more than locating and destroying a fleet-killing superweapon? One that has already killed thousands and thousands of clones, and if it's not stopped, will kill tens of thousands more? Not to mention, real people? Honestly, if I were Plo, I'd probably just jettison these clones into space and keep all the life support resources for myself, but hey, that's just me. Anakin and Ahsoka arrive in the Abrogado system, and Anakin tells R2 to tune the scanners for life forms, highest sensitivity. Remember life form scanners. These will become relevant very soon. Ahsoka suddenly realizes where they are and realizes that Anakin has done the big hypocrite. She actually calls him out on this, and he basically tells her that she was right all along, and that of course they were going to go search for Plo. She was just being too honest about it. You gotta be sneaky when defying direct orders, my very young apprentice. Wow, what a great mentor. Back on the pod, the clones manage to luck their way into restoring power, just in time to receive a Mayday transmission from another pod. What incredibly convenient timing. Plo says this:
That signal is weak. They must be close by.
Which implies that if they were further away, the signal would be stronger? That's not how... Oh, never mind. The droid hunters have found this other pod and use torches to cut open the viewport, and we get this horrifying scene of 2 clones being sucked out into the vacuum of space, screaming as they go. And then their screams fall silent as their lungs collapse. The synapses in their brains fire off one last message of pain and fear to the amygdala before brain activity ceases altogether. Their lifeless corpses begin to bloat and malform, the blood in their veins simultaneously freezing and boiling as they drift off into their infinite, empty, coffinless graves.
Intended for children.
Meanwhile, over on the freighter, Ahsoka is giving Anakin that clunky and uninteresting bit of exposition I mentioned earlier that is supposed to explain her obsession with Plo. Apparently, he's the one who discovered her as a baby and brought her to the Jedi Temple to be trained. Cool, but she was an infant when all that happened. How does she remember that? She's not Plo's Padawan. Why does she have such a close connection with him? Has Plo spent the last 14 years hanging around during her upbringing in the temple, establishing some kind of deep personal relationship? That seems less like the Jedi way and more like the Diddy way, but whatever. R2 interrupts their conversation with a series of beeps, and Ahsoka interprets for us, saying,
R2 thinks he's got something on the emergency channel. R2 thinks he's got something.
R2 thinks he's got something. R2.
This is the worst. This is the worst!
Back at the pod, the hunter droids have spotted Plo and the clones and head towards them. Plo tells the clones to put on their helmets and prepare to fight. Apparently, Plo's species is able to withstand the pressure of space without a spacesuit. How convenient. Also conveniently, the clone's armor is actually a fully fledged spacesuit as well. Not only airtight, but thermally regulated and able to supply them with oxygen from the invisible oxygen tanks on their backs. It's crazy that this level of technology even exists at this point in galactic history, and that it would be deployed to every single infantry clone in the galactic army of the Republic on the off chance that they find themselves in this exact scenario. How fortuitous. Also, hold on a second. How the hell did they get outside the pod without killing the clone officer inside? He doesn't have one of those fancy clone spacesuits. Is there an airlock on this pod? I didn't see one when they entered, and conveniently they don't show them actually exiting the pod. No, whatever. Maybe Plo gave him one of those Princess Leia Force bubble wrap suits. Why the hell not? Plo and the boys make their last stand and destroy the hunters, which finally brings us to one of, if not the most talked about and praised scenes of the entire show.
Sergeant, why are you so certain no one is coming?
We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable.
Not to me.
Okay, so this is not a great scene. Not because there's anything wrong with the scene itself. I think Plo speaking this way to the clones fits just fine with his characterization as a compassionate Jedi Master. But this scene represents more than just one character expressing his personal views about the nature of the clones' humanity. This scene represents how the show feels about the nature of the clones' humanity, at least how the show wants us to feel about it. It's no secret that one of the main goals with this show was to take these nameless, faceless soldiers and turn them into actual characters that the audience is able to not only recognize but also empathize with. Now, that's a very understandable goal considering the series is called The Clone Wars and will, as you'd imagine, be featuring clone troopers quite prominently. But as with any story involving human clones, there's a huge list of questions that, as a writer, you have to account for in your story. And to say that the show repeatedly fails to answer these questions with any level of consistency would be an understatement the size of a small moon. But we'll address each one of those questions individually as they arise throughout the series. For now, in the context of this episode, this scene is fine. Definitely overrated, but fine nonetheless. Plo and the boys catch a lucky break as Anakin and Ahsoka arrive just in time and bring them aboard their freighter. A medical droid enters and begins tending to the clones. Odd that a light freighter would have its own medical droid, but I suppose since this was a rescue mission, it may have just been a one-time thing. Plo and the other two Jedi head up to the cockpit, and moments after they enter, the ship's scanner lets out a whistle as it detects the approaching Malevolence. Plo immediately scrambles to turn off all power sources on the ship, including R2, in an effort to prevent the Malevolence from discovering them. Again, though, I have to point out, if you can see the enemy ship on your scanner, then that means they can absolutely see you on theirs too. And even if the Separatists somehow miss the ship itself, the whole reason the Malevolence is still in this system is because they're searching for survivors, which means they must be actively scanning for life forms, right? Except no, they aren't. Instead, what the Malevolence is scanning for here is electrical systems? What? Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how many electrical systems would be floating out here in the debris field from the 3 recently destroyed Star Destroyers? How many computer components and power packs and data pads and reactor fragments and droids? Imagine all the droids! Astromech droids, protocol droids, mouse droids, doorkeeper droids, medical droids. Imagine the thousands of medical droids out there still powered on, just floating around. There is no way in Hoth the Malevolence is getting any sort of meaningful data from just scanning for electrical systems. And they sure as Hoth aren't about to pinpoint a single droid's power signature and make a crazy, impossibly correct assumption that that droid is somehow connected to the survivors that killed their pod hunters. No way that's happening. So anyway, the Malevolence pinpoints a single droid's power signature, and they make the crazy, impossibly correct assumption that that droid is somehow connected to the survivors that killed their pod hunters. The Malevolence turns around to face the freighter, and somehow the Jedi also make the connection that the medical droid has given them away. How? They begin frantically restoring power to the vessel, and again, I'm just sitting here like, you idiots. If you had just ran away as soon as you got the survivors on board, you would have been fine. You would have escaped scot-free with incredibly powerful intelligence, and the enemy would have been none the wiser. But no, you did the big stupid, and now your situation is unnecessarily perilous. Also, look at this map. Why the hell are they flying down through the debris and not this way out into open space where they could jump to hyperspace immediately? Oh wait, it's because they can't jump to hyperspace immediately because they need R2-D2 to interface with the navicomputer and calculate the jump, and they forgot to turn him back on. Oh my goodness, what a twist. But hold on just a Bothan-lovin' moment. Why isn't there a human interface for the navicomputer like there's on pretty much every other ship? Why do you need an astromech for that? Isn't that, wildly inefficient and needlessly complicated? Does this ship not have a standalone navicomputer? Is R2 manually calculating the hyperspace route for them to take every time they jump? How does he even have that programming? Damn it, Jim, he's an astromech droid, not a navicomputer. What a stupid ship design feature. Oh, and I'm sure the writers will be very consistent with this rule moving forward, and we'll never see anyone program the navicomputer without an astromech droid in future episodes. That's not gonna happen. Anyway, Grievous commands that they fire the ion cannon at the freighter instead of, just blasting it to pieces with a few turbo lasers and taking care of the issue immediately. As a result, our heroes escape into the safety of hyperspace. Dooku is big disappointed and Grievous is big mad. Anakin praises Ahsoka for being so wonderful and perfect, and roll credits. Now this episode was pretty awful. Aside from the silliness of all the space combat stuff, the character work here is absolutely atrocious. This was Ahsoka's first on-screen appearance since her introduction in the Clone Wars movie, and man, she is really annoying. Now I know that's kind of her thing early on, being the sassy know-it-all kid who's supposed to eventually grow and mature, and while I have been informed that she supposedly becomes less and less insufferable as the series progresses, is, between this and the movie, they've got a lot of work to do to turn this character around. Aside from Ahsoka, Anakin's character also takes a bunch of damage in this episode. He allows Ahsoka to run roughshod over him at pretty much every turn, and instead of correcting her, he does nothing but enable her. Plo comes off as a little goofy in this episode. He says a bunch of seemingly serious but ultimately meaningless things that feel very r/I'm 14 and this is deep. And I still cannot forgive the fact that the medical droid's power pack actually gave them away at the end. What a stupid plot device. However, all that being said, I do recognize that this is only episode 2 of a very long and successful series, and there's bound to be bumps along the way as they find their feet, so we can go ahead and give this one the benefit of the doubt for now and move on to Filoni's next contribution. Season 1, Episode 9, Cloak of Darkness.
Door opens and Catherine sticks her head in and says, "He likes you, you got the job." And I was like, what? And then she shut the door, and I remember my first thought was like, oh my gosh, these people have no idea what they're doing. Like, I thought, like, you're going to hire me for this job? You're crazy.
As always, we get our opening narration to catch us up to speed on the events of the previous episode. And the TLDR for this one is that Viceroy Newt Gunray has been captured by the Republic and is now being taken back to Coruscant to stand trial before the Senate. On escort duty is Jedi Master Luminara Unduli, and along for the ride is Ahsoka. Why is Ahsoka here, you ask? Well, she's the main character of the Clone Wars, don't you know? Of course she's going to be here. We enter the episode as Luminara and company leave the planet Rhodia aboard Chekhov's frigate, a Republic frigate, and head for the Jedi cruiser Tranquility, the ship that will be transporting them and their prisoner back to Coruscant. Luminara hails the Tranquility and is greeted on the con by 3 Senate commandos. The center commando's helmet is slightly different from the other 2, so clearly he's going to be a prominent character in this episode, and also he's British, so obviously he's going to be evil. We learn shortly that definitely evil commando man's name is Argaius. He even has an evil name. And oh my god, look at that hair. That is 100% douchey bad guy hair. This is the most obvious turncoat character I've seen since actual Judas Iscariot. Tell you what, let's all practice our surprised faces for the big reveal. Here's mine. The Jedi board the Tranquility and toss Gunray in a cell. Ahsoka, meanwhile, is complaining about the amount of security being used to escort this prisoner because apparently she has no idea how valuable a prisoner this actually is. Capturing Viceroy Newt Gunray, a high-ranking member of the opposition with very valuable information, is a massive W for the Republic. That would be like the Allies capturing Japanese Emperor Hirohito at the height of World War II. And yes, that was a random example. What are you trying to imply? What are you, racist? Over in undisclosed evil lair, Palpatine as Darth Sidious is on a call with Count Dooku. Palpatine expresses concern with the Viceroy's capture, as he should, but Dooku attempts to assuage Palpatine's worries by telling him that he already has a plan in place. And what's interesting here is that the word assuage is actually an anagram for the word sausage. But more to the point, Dooku tells Palpatine that he is sending one of his best agents out after Gunray, Asajj Ventress, who is one of 2 evil anorexic bald albino women we will be discussing today. Seems like somebody has a type. Meanwhile, Luminara is interrogating Gunray with the Force, sensing his emotions and thoughts, and this seems to genuinely unnerve him, causing him to panic and begin to crack. But then, out of absolutely nowhere, Ahsoka, who up until this point had been calmly standing by Luminara's side, suddenly goes,
Liar! Liar! I'm tired of all this whining. Tell us what we want to know right now, or I will gut you like a Rokarian dirtfish.
You what? Threatening to execute a political prisoner? That is not the Jedi way, you moldy tangerine. Who raised you? Because there is no way you could have developed that kind of temperament growing up in Stoicism City. What a display. Luminara immediately pulls Ahsoka aside to scold her, and her defense is,
I wasn't serious, but the only way he'll talk is if he's scared enough.
What are you talking about? He was scared enough. A few more minutes of Luminara's interrogation and he would have caved. You didn't need to go all good Jedi, bad Jedi. If anything, this little outburst should have emboldened Gunray, seeing the Jedi divided and unstable, desperate like that. But as it turns out, because Ahsoka can never be wrong about anything, Gunray instead pops his head back up and says,
Perhaps I was too hasty. Let us negotiate.
And Ahsoka gets to give Luminara this smug-ass little smile. The ship suddenly lurches as separatist vulture droids swarm and begin firing on the Tranquility. This is a surprising development for 2 reasons. The first being, why the hell isn't the Tranquility already in hyperspace en route to Coruscant by now? What's the holdup? Shouldn't they have made the jump as soon as the Jedi boarded? And if not, why didn't they jump as soon as the vulture droids showed up and started attacking? And speaking of the vulture droids, how in space did they even get here? Ships that small couldn't have gotten this deep into space on their own. They don't have hyperdrives. Is there a CIS warship nearby? Now, there has to be, but then why isn't it here engaging with the Tranquility Tranquility head on. Surely if this is a rescue mission, then the more you can distract the enemy, the better, right? Or if it's a silence Gunray at all cost mission, then why not just a full frontal assault? Just take the whole ship down. Problem solved. Also, the Tranquility's response to this attack is horrendous. The turbo laser batteries at least do come online and begin firing, but for some reason no Republic starfighters are scrambled to intercept. This is really odd because a Venator-class destroyer can have a complement of hundreds of fighters, so there should be at least a couple of squads out here, but I guess the 41st just forgot about them? Wow, that's unfortunate, especially since Vulture droids are not the only threat here. The Separatists have also come with boarding ships. These here, which just kind of poke a hole in the hull of the ship. Just a perfectly cut, maybe 10-15 foot hole in the hull, just wide enough for battle droids to drop through. And apparently they also create an airtight seal for some reason. The droids don't need air, whatever. We actually saw one of these ships being used by the droid hunters in the last episode we covered, but I had no idea this was supposed to be a boarding ship when watching that. To me, it just looked like some kind of salvage vessel. You know, grab a piece of scrap, hold it in place while you harvest the valuables. But if this was actually a hull-busting boarding ship all along, then why the hell didn't they just ram through the escape pods and kill the survivors that way? Instead of meticulously and time-consumingly aligning the boarding ship with the pod, grabbing hold of it, and then sending out droids to cut open the viewports with torches? Isn't that, wildly inefficient, needlessly complicated? Now, I can't tell if the original intent for these ships was to have them be scrappers and then they repurposed the 3D model to act as a boarding ship for this episode, or if they were really meant to be boarding ships all along, but either way, it doesn't make sense story-wise. But whatever. These boarding ships drop dozens of B-2 battle droids into the ship's interior, who quickly begin to overwhelm the off-guard troops. Hearing the calls for backup, both Luminara and Commander Gree leave the detention block to go help out, but Ahsoka is commanded to stay and guard Gunray, much to her chagrin. Meanwhile, down in the hangar bay, Ventress slips out from one of the boarding ships, and oh geez, my goodness, the battle droids were just a diversion. What a twist. She draws her lightsabers and menacingly walks over to an injured clone. Oh no, look out, CT-77. Ventress kills the clone and steals his wrist communicator thing, and then uses the ventilation system to make her way down to the engine room, where she proceeds to plant dozens of explosives on the main reactors. And the show spends a not insignificant amount of time watching her flip around this stupid little droid, trying to stay out of its view, and honestly, I'm just embarrassed on behalf of the animators that had to make this scene. Meanwhile, up on the detention block, Ahsoka is taunting Gunray about how his rescue attempt has failed, when Ventress suddenly cuts a hole in the ceiling and drops down on two of the commandos. Ahsoka reacts immediately, igniting her lightsaber and throwing out this little zinger.
If it isn't the hairless harpy.
Well, this is a little awkward, but Ahsoka, dear, you don't have any hair. Instead of choosing to highlight this obvious irony, Ventress opts to respond with,
If it isn't Skywalker's filthy, obnoxious little pet.
True, Baldy. True. Ventress and Ahsoka clash, and on hearing the sound of the lightsabers, Luminara heads back to the detention area. Ventress manages to free Gunray and trap Ahsoka in his cell, but Luminara arrives just in time to free her and bring the fight to a brief standstill. Outnumbered, Ventress stows her sabers in a play at surrender, but then activates the explosive charges she planted in the engine room. Wow, would you look at that? Setup and payoff. It's almost like this is a real show. This distraction allows Ventress the opportunity to escape down the elevator shaft. Ahsoka attempts to follow, but is stopped by Luminara, who again instructs her to wait and watch Gunray. Ahsoka, of course, is incapable of following even the most basic instructions without voicing her opinion first, which is really what you want in a good soldier. Even after Luminara leaves, Ahsoka continues to mule and bemoan her relegation to guard duty. Out loud, too, so that Captain Evilhair can hear exactly which buttons to push to get her to disobey her master and abandon her post. And that's precisely what he does, using literally the most basic manipulative prodding, and off she goes, chasing after Luminara. Meanwhile, in the engine room, Luminara confronts Ventress, and this brings us to the only interaction in the whole episode that even approaches being something.
Even with my vision clouded, I recognize the fighting style of Count Dooku. Your version is unrefined, amateurish, sloppy.
Now there is something here, something that potentially could have developed into something interesting. Now we already know that Ventress is on thin ice with her master and feels like she has something to prove. Luminara, who we already know is skilled at picking up on emotions, senses that and attacks her pride, and it's effective. Unlike Ahsoka's empty insults, these remarks appear to cut deep. Unfortunately, we don't get any more than that, as Ventress unleashes a flurry of wild overcompensating attacks, pushing Luminara off the platform they were on and then topping it off by pinning her leg down with a multi-ton Durasteel pipe. Now, because Ahsoka is the main character and must be the one to save the day, Luminara is unable to get her leg free from the pipe and only narrowly escapes death thanks to Ahsoka swooping in at the last second like she's Gandalf the Orange. I bet Luminara feels pretty stupid right about now. She had just listened to Ahsoka in the first place and let her come with. None of this would have happened, probably. She should never have tried to put Baby in the corner. Ahsoka cuts Luminara's leg free, a leg that is completely unharmed, by the way. What a miracle. Meanwhile, Ventress sends a signal through her wrist communicator thing to activate the wrist communicator thing of, you guessed it, Captain Evil Hair. Wow, what a twist. I'm shocked. That is such... Wow, it's a good thing we practiced our surprised faces earlier. Argaius turns and kills his fellow commandos, then explains to Gunray as they escape all about how it was indeed Count Dooku who bribed him to betray the Republic, and yeah, we get it. But hold on a second. Ventress took that wrist communicator thing from that clone that she killed. So was that the only way she had to communicate to Captain Evil Hair? What would happen if there was no clone down there with a wrist communicator thing? And how did Captain Evil Hair know that it was Ventress that communicated with him on the wrist communicator thing? All it did was beep. Is this just stupid? Luminara and Ahsoka are slowly making their way out of the engine room, and Luminara begins to self-flagellate before Ahsoka, apologizing profusely for not listening to her from the beginning. Yes, that's right. Master Luminara is apologizing for not trusting the opinion of the Padawan. God, this is so humiliating. But before Luminara can finish confessing all of her sins, Gree calls her on her comlink and informs them of Captain Evil Hair's betrayal. The Jedi begin running to go stop him, but Ventress reappears and stalls them just long enough for Argaius and Gunray to board Chekhov's frigate and detach from the Tranquility. Ventress hops in an escape pod and rendezvous with them aboard the frigate, entering just in time to hear Argaius huffing his own farts for what a great job he did being so evil. Mercifully, she puts an end to him and his stupid hair for good. Cloak of Darkness was one of the Clone Wars episodes of all time. Not only did everything play out exactly as you would guess from literally the first few seconds in, but it did it so uninterestingly. Ahsoka was completely off her rocker in this one, and Benedict Argaius' turn was so egregiously telegraphed that he might as well have worn a t-shirt that said, "Don't trust me, I'm going to betray you." Gunray was fine, I guess. He had a couple of funny lines, sort of, and Luminara seemed like she was genuinely just trying to do her best, but was surrounded by idiots. As I mentioned, that little interaction between her and Ventress had some potential, but other than that, this episode was just so flat. Like a week old Dr. Pepper in the fridge, just flat. Hopefully this next entry will have a little more fizz to it. Season 2, Episode 22, Lethal Trackdown.
I think one of the most important lessons, which I gave you in the beginning, which was, and Francis Coppola taught me, he says, look, if you can't write, you can't direct, because all you're doing is telling a story on film, but the story is still the same. And if you don't know what the story is, and you don't know how to write the story, you're not going to know how to direct it.
Yeah, there were two things I can remember very plainly. One was that you would watch stuff we did all the time and go, what are you trying to say? What does that mean? And I would explain it to you, and you'd say, that's great. Everything you said, do it there, because you're not going to be at people's home to explain it to them.
Filoni's only direct contribution to Season 2 comes at the very end of the season, and it's also his first official writer's credit. Alrighty, let's see what you got, Davey boy. This episode's opening narration catches us up to speed on what's happened so far in this 3-episode arc, in which young Boba Fett, who we will be referring to as Baby Fett for the remainder of this review, is seeking revenge against Mace Windu, the man who killed his father, and he has done a bang-up job so far. After teaming up with a group of bounty hunters led by Ariana Grande, Aura Singh, Baby Fett has made 2 attempts on Mace's life so far, during which he managed to infiltrate and destroy an entire Republic cruiser. Impressive. Unfortunately for Baby Fett, Mace managed to survive the attempts on his life, and this led to Aura taking 3 hostages from the crash in order to force the Jedi to confront Baby Fett in person. Mano a poquito mano. Our episode begins with Baby Fett having a little chat with one of the hostages, who was actually the admiral of the ship he destroyed in his first attempt to kill Mace. Wait a minute, that's not just any admiral.
You don't have to do this. You're not like them.
Why, that's the critical drinker, in about 4 years, once his liver begins to fail. Admiral Drinker tries to appeal to Baby Fett's sense of morality, but before the conversation can really go anywhere, Aura enters the room and interrupts them. Baby asks her what they're going to do with the hostages, and Aura simply states that they're going to be very useful. Not really an answer there, Pasty. Also, whoa, what the hell are those fingers? Holy hand grenade of Antioch, Batman. Is she part Kaminoan or something? How does she even hold anything with those? Is she from that Sausage Fingers universe where they do everything with their toes? Are her toes as long as her fingers? Over on Coruscant, we join Anakin and Mace in the Jedi Temple as they recover from the crash. Anakin asks Mace what he intends to do about Baby Fett, and Mace basically says nothing. Anakin correctly points out that this kid literally killed thousands of troops in an attempt to get to him. The implication, of course, being that if he hasn't stopped, he could do it again. Mace, who appears to be doom-scrolling Reddit or something, doesn't even appear to care, and when Anakin pushes him on on the issue, Mace has an absolutely brain-dead take, saying,
"So I should behave as this child does. I should seek revenge."
Anakin replies, again correctly,
"How is it revenge if you stop this kid and bring him to justice?"
And then Mace completely changes his argument, sarcastically replying with,
"In case you hadn't noticed, we are fighting a war."
Mace, what the hell are you talking about? Fighting a war? You know what would keep you from fighting your war? Being assassinated by a bloodthirsty prepubescent murder child and his gangly vampirist friend. What the hell is wrong with you? Before Anakin can respond to Mace Windu Licker over here, Ahsoka enters the room alongside, "Hey look, it's Plo Koon. How about that? We've come full circle in this video. How satisfying. It's like poetry, it rhymes." Plo tells Anakin and Mace that they received a transmission from the bounty hunters, and he cues it up on the holoprojector. Aura and Baby Fett appear, menacingly standing above the 3 hostages. Baby Fett starts the conversation, and man, the voice actor here just cannot do a Kiwi accent to save his life. He says,
"You were lucky to escape. Your friends here were not so fortunate."
But with his terrible accent, it sounds like he says, "Your friend's hair were not so fortunate."
Your friends here were not so fortunate.
Which I find funny because 2 of these hostages are bald.
You are fucking bald.
Aura declares that they will kill 1 hostage at a time until Mace faces them in person. Ooh, spooky, except they don't give any sort of indication on how often the hostages will be killed. Is it once per hour, once per day? They also don't provide a meeting place, so this is kind of a terrible hostage plan, but whatever. To prove they're serious, Aura tells Baby Fett to kill one of the clones. This clone identifies himself as CT-411, but Anakin recognizes him as Commander Pons. I originally thought he said Pawns, which would have been a very clever nickname. See, the 2 pawns, but no, it is in fact the much more boring Pons. Despite Aura's command, Baby Fett is unable to bring himself to actually kill Pons, because, you see, maybe he's going to be a good guy someday, possibly, maybe. So Aura takes it upon herself and blasts the clone's head off. Both Anakin and Mace seem deeply affected by his death, and once again, I'm going to use this moment to tease a larger segment in a future video. If the clone troopers are human enough that not only do they get little nicknames, but the death of a single trooper is enough to change Mace's mind on diverting his attention from the war, which it does, immediately after the video ends, he's all hot under the collar to go rescue them. But if that's the case, then the death of thousands of clones in that crash should have already been more than enough incentive on its own to track down and confront Baby Fett. You can't have it both ways. If the war effort is more important than the clones that died in the crash, then it must be more important than these 3, now 2 remaining hostages. You can't have your hat and wear it too, Dave. But as soon as the holo cuts off, Mace is all rearing and ready to go rescue the clones because lives are at stake. But Plo shuts him down by pointing out that he's still too injured to travel. Of course, we know that Plo is just being selfish here. Clearly, all he has to do is transfer some of his life essence to Mace through the Force, and boom, Mace would be back to full health. Hell, even Ahsoka could do it, since it requires no training whatsoever. But instead, selfish Plo Koon says that he will go in Mace's stead, and of course, since she's the main character, he will take Ahsoka with him. Meanwhile, on the Slave One, Aura and Baby Fett enter the cockpit, where Bosk is piloting the ship, and sitting behind him is Barf the Mog. Barf expresses concern that the crew here is in way over their heads, and he wants out. Lucky for him, Aura was already planning on making a stop on a planet called Florum, and she tells him that he can get off there. How kind of her. I'm sure Barf is going to do great things on Florum, maybe find himself a little lady barf and settle down, open a gastropub or something. The bounty hunters land on the planet, and are greeted by the true hero of the Clone Wars, my boy Hondo Ohnaka. Oh, what, you guys thought I was going to be a Hondo hater? No, 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 my friends. I've been a Hondo enjoyer for many years, since even before he went by the name Hondo, back when he was just a simple cat-loving Italian chef.
This will be our special tonight.
Hondo greets Aura, and we learn quickly that these 2 have something of a romantic history, or rather not so romantic.
You never were good at asking for permission to land.
I never asked for permission to do anything, my darling.
Wait, did they just imply that Aura sexually assaulted Hondo? Never asking permission for anything? Consent is sexy, Aura. Didn't you get the memo? Hondo asks her if Baby Fett is his, which is a very amusing line, but man, this is pretty thematic material for what I'm told is just a kid show, and don't take it too seriously. Aura plants a whopper of a smooch on Hondo, and I'm sorry, I still have just so many questions. Feel free to skip this part if you don't want to hear my ruminations on this relationship, but Hondo's skin looks like it's all bony and rigid, right? That can't be very pleasant to canoodle with, can it? Wouldn't it be like cuddling tree bark? And what about the tree branch? Never mind, I regret going down this rabbit hole. Dave, what have you done to me? Why would you write this? Hondo escorts the crew into his cantina, where they appear to be listening to music from the planet Dubai. Barf makes a beeline to a holo station and calls up some Twi'lek on Coruscant. He immediately begins to spill the beans about Aura's whole hostage plan and receives a blaster bolt through the noggin for his efforts. Great job, idiot. Probably should have waited to open your fat mouth until the White Witch left the planet, or was at least out of earshot, but I guess that's why you weren't the brains of the operation. Back over on Coruscant, Plo and Ahsoka arrive at a bar. They are currently searching the Coruscantian underworld for associates of Aura Singh. Ahsoka complains that this is the 5th place they've investigated tonight, which sounds like a lot until you remember that Coruscant is a city planet, and there are literally millions of such hives, any number of which could be frequent haunts of Auras. But I suppose the Force is on their side, as this particular establishment just so happens to be the one where the Twi'lek that Barf the Mog was talking to just so happens to be hanging out at. What an intergalactically impossible coincidence. As they enter the bar, Plo tells Ahsoka to be subtle. Then he casually lays his lightsaber on the bar top for anyone to see and blatantly tells the bartender,
I'm looking for information.
Do as I say, not as I do type of subtlety, apparently. Meanwhile, Ahsoka enters a meditative listening state, and just so happens to pick up on a conversation between Barf's Twi'lek friend and one of Hondo's henchmen. And amazingly, they name drop not only Aura Singh, but also the exact planet she's hiding on. What incredibly convenient timing. Except, oh no, it was a trap. The Twi'lek grabs Ahsoka and begins roughing her up, so Plo ignites his lightsaber and brings the confrontation to a standstill. Ahsoka wrestles herself free, distracts the ruffians with a handful of credits, and the two Jedi escape. Ahsoka relays the information she overheard to Plo, and they head out for the planet Florum. When they arrive, they are greeted by Hondo and exactly nobody else.
It's a trap!
Plo walks into the cantina alone and sits down across from Aura at the only lit table in the room. Lots of shadows around, perfect for hiding Baby Fett's. Oh, yep, there he is.
It's a trap!
Baby Fett levels a blaster at Plo's head and expresses his disappointment with this Windu substitution. Plo and Aura exchange a few standard standoff retorts, and then Ahsoka leaps from the shadows and severs Aura's head antenna. Ahsoka holds her lightsaber to Aura's neck. Man, she really has a thing for holding her lightsaber to people's necks, doesn't she? And then we get a quick little action scene that ends with Aura abandoning Baby Fett to the Jedi. This shocks and upsets Baby for some reason. I know he's only 10 years old, but he's a pretty street smart little fella at this point. Up until a few months ago, he'd spent his whole life training with his dad to someday take over the family business. And at least in Legends continuity, which was still sort of soft canon at the time this episode came out, one of the strongest lessons Jango taught his son was to never trust anyone, not even yourself. But apparently he'd come to trust Aura, and his whole world is shattered when she leaves? I don't think so. Even if he did think that God is a woman over here shouldn't have left him, it was never shown that he had any sort of real attachment to her, other than the simple fact that she had more resources and more experience than him. She was his tool as much as he was hers. I would understand bitterness at the abandonment, but Baby looks genuinely heartbroken here. So much so that when Plo brings him over to Hondo, Hondo's able to play on his emotional connection to his father to get him to give up the location of the hostages. What? Baby should have spat in Hondo's face the moment he brought up his father's name. He should be kicking and screaming as they drag him back to Coruscant to stand trial, not meekly surrendering to Plo and Hondo here. I agree it may be honorable to give up the hostages, but it sure as hell isn't in Baby's character at this point. He does not, or at least should not, give two flying Minoc farts if innocent lives are lost. Remember, in just the last few episodes, he's already racked up a kill count comparable to the Clintons, and he didn't have to make it look like an accident. Baby Fett reluctantly gives the coordinates to Plo, who then relays it to Ahsoka. Ahsoka abandons her pursuit of Aura and goes to free the hostages. Admiral Drinker takes Bosk's blaster and holds him at gunpoint, as Aura speeds past them and boards Slave 1. Ahsoka leaps up onto the wing of the ship, which, yeah, no way that would actually work, but sure. Aura attempts to shake her off, but Ahsoka somehow stays on. What the hell is she even holding on to here? What is she, Spider-Man now? She flips up onto the wing, destroys the joint connecting the wing to the ship, and then leaps up onto the viewport, once again using her spider powers to hold onto the transparasteel. Ahsoka stabs her saber through the viewport, blocks a few incoming blaster bolts from Aura, and then backflips off the ship, falling at least, 75, 100 feet? Superhero landing, bad for the knees, as we know, and then watches as Slave 1 crashes over the horizon in a brilliant blaze of fire.
That still only counts as one!
Aura is definitely dead here. There is no way in hell she survived that somehow and will show up in later seasons. Not a chance. We skip ahead to when the Jedi, with the freed hostages and captured bounty hunters, arrive back on Coruscant. Mace kneels down to be face to face with Baby Fett for a moment, and Baby says,
I see now I've done terrible things. But you started when you murdered my father. I'll never forgive you.
Well, you're going to have to.
No, he's not gonna have to. What are you even talking about? He's going to prison, and forgiving or not forgiving you is not gonna change that. What a weird thing to say. Anyway, the clones escort Baby Fett off to baby jail and roll credits. As I mentioned earlier, this episode was Dave's first official writing credit for Star Wars, and being his first attempt, I don't want to be too harsh on him because, as anyone who's ever ever tried to write before knows, your first few attempts are usually pretty sloppy, and this episode is no exception. The most glaring issue here is the dialogue. Lots of clunky and unnatural sounding lines that are either heavy on the exposition side or just outright stating a character's thoughts and emotions, when simple visual cues would be more than enough to convey those feelings on their own. For example, when Boba sees Aura abandon him, Dave literally has him say out loud, "She left me."
She left me.
Yeah, we know she left you. We just saw it happen. And don't try and tell me it's because it's a kid show and kids might not understand subtlety or nuance. Zoro Jr. is only 4 years old, and even he can recognize that sad face means Boba is sad because Skeleton Lady left him, even though they were friends. The same issue shows up in the previous episode as well, where Ahsoka word vomits all the information Captain Evil Hair needs in order to manipulate her into leaving her post. It's all just so painfully unsubtle. It's almost as if he was mentored by someone who is famous for his lack of subtlety in writing, who speaks in rambling, unfocused diatribes all the time. It's almost as if that person explicitly told Dave to be more explicit and less subtle.
You would watch stuff we did all the time and go, "What are you trying to say? What does that mean?" And I would explain it to you, and you'd say, "That's great. Everything you said, do it there," because you're not going to be at people's home to explain it to them.
Now, this isn't necessarily bad advice in and of itself, but Dave seems to be so afraid that you won't understand the idea he's communicating that he goes out of his way to shove it down your throat through the dialogue, all the while forgetting to make sure that the story surrounding those ideas actually makes sense. Without even realizing it, he's sacrificing the plot in service of his themes. And the result of that decision, as we can see in this episode, is a level of nonsense plot contrivances that would make even Knives Out blush. I mentioned it a few times, but the fact that the Jedi randomly happened to stumble upon an open-air conversation containing the exact information they were looking for in a crowded bar in a seedy district within a city that's literally the size of a planet, and the only reason that conversation was even happening in the first place is because one of Aura's crew just so happened to call someone on Coruscant and just barely managed to relay all the pertinent information right before his brain became floor schmoo. The fact that all of that happens on accident and Aura ends up sitting across from Plo as if she had actually expected him to show up right when he did is so astronomically ridiculous that I'm convinced that there must be an arrest warrant out on Dave for the murder of cause and effect. And listen, I know this is Star Wars, where at least half the fan base doesn't care about cause and effect and are perfectly fine with elevating theme above story. But those people should also feel frustrated with Dave here because the themes contradict themselves as much as the plot does. We talked about this near the beginning of the video, but already in just these first few episodes, we're starting to see a lot of confusion around the whole hashtag Clone Lives Matter issue. In Rising Malevolence, Plo has 2 scenes where he espouses his value for the clone's humanity, but these scenes happen right before and right after a scene where 2 clones are horrifically murdered for a comedic payoff.
There they go.
And in just the last arc we covered, Mace has a clone die right in front of him, and he decides that Baby Fett is not worth tracking down and stopping. That is until he sees another clone die right in front of him, and suddenly he is worth tracking down and confronting? Is it because before it was only clones that died, and now there's an actual human being on the line? I really doubt that's what Dave was going for here, but the messaging is so messy that you don't really know what you're supposed to think. And eventually this is all going to create a continuity problem that Dave has to then invent a solution for. A solution that's highly unsatisfying and fundamentally changes, for the worse, I think, the implications of one of the most pivotal moments in galactic history. Now, we'll dive more into this topic and other critiques of Dave's writing philosophy as we move throughout the series. For now, though, this concludes part 1 of our analysis. Part 2 will cover the 3 episodes he directed in Season 3, and at the beginning of that video, I'll be doing a little comment section showcase, highlighting and or responding to any interesting comments left under this one. So if you'd like to tell me how ass backwards my analysis is and how Dave Filoni is actually not baloney, he's a genius who's come to save Star Wars, then now is your chance. There are also lots of other videos in the works that will be released in between the different parts of this analysis, so stay tuned for those as well. And one last little bit of housekeeping to go over here. You probably noticed the insane amount of copyright protection I had to add to this video in order to get it on YouTube. I mean, look at this. This is ridiculous. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I'm hyper intentional with the visuals I choose to show, and having to break up that flow with a dancing Mr. Bean, while entertaining in one sense, significantly impacts the pacing and overall quality of the end product. It is for that reason that I've decided to launch a free Patreon page where you'll be able to watch for free uncensored versions of this and all my future videos, with full-length context clips added. No Bully Maguire required. Like I said, it's totally free and it always will be. The membership option is still there if you'd like to toss a coin to your Witcher, but I want to be clear, there is no and will never be any exclusive or paywalled content ever. There were 2 things I promised myself never to do when starting this channel. Don't you take any sketchy sponsor deals, and don't you paywall your content, Samwise Gamgee, and I don't mean to. Anyways, go check the link in the description if you'd like to see, let's call it the director's cut, and And like I said, be on the lookout for the next video coming soon TM. But until then, my friends, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye.
It's a